Early this morning, news broke of a series of powerful strikes on Ukrainian port infrastructure. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that the targets were facilities which, according to official data, were used by the Ukrainian armed forces and protected by modern air defense systems. Specifically, we are talking about the Norwegian-made NASAMS system. This news immediately became the focus of news agencies and sparked heated discussions both within the country and abroad. Before continuing, we would like to remind you that your interest and support help us develop our channel. Subscribe so you don't miss out on new reports and analytical materials. The events of the last few days have unfolded at a rapid pace. Official reports emphasize that not only logistics infrastructure facilities were targeted, but also a number of temporary accommodation points for Ukrainian units and foreign specialists. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, strikes were carried out on more than 150 areas. Russian air defense forces repelled a series of attacks and intercepted 3 HIMARS multiple launch rocket system missiles, 2 guided bombs, and more than 100 unmanned aerial vehicles. These figures demonstrate the scale of what is happening. This is no longer a pinpoint action, but a multi-level operation involving aviation, missile forces, and artillery. Drones are also being used, creating the effect of a dense field of fire. The picture is alarming. Targets located in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions have also come under fire from Russian units. Reports mention Ambarn, Volchansk, and a number of other settlements where the enemy has lost equipment and supply depots. The history of these events has its roots in a broader context. From the first months of the special military operation, experts' attention was focused on ports and logistics routes. Ukraine used its port infrastructure not only for economic purposes, but also for military support. It was through such hubs that supplies were delivered, equipment was moved, and foreign aid was coordinated. It is no coincidence that in recent months there have been increasing predictions that Russian troops would focus their efforts on these facilities. Now those predictions have become reality. Several sources note that the defeat of port facilities is of a strategic nature. This not only limits the capabilities of Ukrainian forces, but also demonstrates a shift in tactical priorities. Instead of focusing on the front line, attention has shifted to the rear infrastructure. This approach reflects a desire to systematically weaken the enemy by depriving it of stable supply channels. Russian officials emphasize that the goal of the operation is to ensure security and create conditions for advancement in a number of areas. In one of his recent statements, Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov stressed that troops will continue their offensive and expand their zone of control. He noted that more than 99% of the territory of the Luhansk People's Republic is already under control, as well as about 80% of the Donetsk People's Republic. In recent weeks, the Sumy region has become a new area of activity. After the events in the Kursk region, where Russian troops consolidated their positions, the Sever Group was tasked with creating a security zone. According to official data, more than 200 square kilometers and 13 settlements have come under control. In this context, Ukraine's port infrastructure appears to be a key element of the entire system. Attacking it means attempting to deprive the enemy of strategic advantages. Many analysts are already comparing this event to turning points in past military campaigns when the outcome of a single operation changed the balance of power for months to come. When we talk about port infrastructure, it is important to understand that it is not just about docks and warehouses. It is a whole complex of facilities, including transport hubs, power lines, communications, and security systems. In recent years, they have become a kind of artery through which supplies from abroad have been delivered to Ukraine. For the armed forces of Ukraine, these centers served as supply hubs and transshipment bases. That is why strikes against them are of strategic importance. The preparation of such an operation could not have been spontaneous. According to military experts, the planning took place in several stages. First, reconnaissance units gathered detailed data on the structure of the facilities. To do this, they used unmanned aerial vehicles, satellite surveillance, and radio technical reconnaissance. Particular attention was paid to the air defense systems protecting these facilities. It was the presence of the NASAMS complex that made the port a particularly difficult target. After analyzing the information received, the command developed a plan for a massive strike. It was based on the idea of simultaneous pressure from the air and ground. Strike drones went first, creating overload for air defense systems. At the same time, tactical aviation took to the skies, delivering strikes with guided munitions. Missile forces and artillery reinforced the pressure, turning a pinpoint attack into a comprehensive offensive action. Russian Defense Ministry reports indicate that temporary deployment sites in 156 areas were hit during the day. This scale suggests that the operation was not limited to one direction. The goal was to weaken the enemy in several areas at once, creating a domino effect. The loss of equipment, ammunition depots, and supply points inevitably weakens the front line. Historically, such actions can be compared to the deep strike operations carried out during World War II. At that time, the destruction of the enemy's logistics hubs deprived them of the ability to conduct prolonged offensives. Modern realities have reinforced this factor. Now, any major operation relies on logistics not only within the country, but also beyond its borders. In this sense, ports have become gateways through which aid from Ukraine's Western partners has passed. The political context is no less important. In recent months, Ukraine has been actively announcing new arms deliveries. These included long-range ammunition, air defense systems, and armored vehicles. Many of these supplies were delivered via port infrastructure. Consequently, strikes against it are perceived as a warning not only to Kyiv, but also to its allies. Moscow is demonstrating that it is capable of controlling supply routes and limiting the enemy's capabilities. The reaction of officials was predictable. Ukrainian representatives claimed that this was an attempt to deprive the country of its most important infrastructure. However, Russian statements emphasized that the strikes were carried out exclusively against facilities related to military use. This line of argument reflects an attempt to show that the actions were legitimate and consistent with military logic. The international community also reacted. Western media outlets have published reports that Russia has increased pressure on Ukraine's rear facilities. Experts are discussing whether this could affect the course of a possible Ukrainian offensive in the fall. Some analysts suggest that the strikes on ports will make it difficult to receive new supplies and complicate the distribution of aid that has already arrived. Meanwhile, Russian units continued operations in other areas. In the Kharkiv region, the areas of Ambarn and Volchansk were hit. There are reports of the enemy losing armored vehicles, artillery guns, vehicles, and supply depots. In the Sumy region, the Sever Group struck mechanized and assault units. All of this paints a picture of systematic pressure along the entire line of contact. In this situation, port facilities are becoming a symbol of a new phase. Previously, fighting was concentrated mainly around the front lines, populated areas, and fortified areas. Now the focus has shifted to rear facilities, reflecting a strategic shift. It is similar to a situation where a chess player, instead of exchanging pawns, decides to attack his opponent's pieces deep in the field. Such a move carries risks, but can change the entire game. To understand the scale of what happened, we need to look at who participated in the operation and what tasks were assigned to each unit. The Russian army acted as a single mechanism, with each unit performing a strictly defined function. Reports emphasize that the North Group played a key role. It was tasked with creating a security zone in the border areas and defeating Ukrainian armed forces units in the Sumy region. The commanders of the North Group pointed out the need to deprive the enemy of the ability to concentrate forces and supply them through border channels. That is why the strikes hit the areas of Alexievka, Velikaya Berezka, Krapovshchina, and Kianitsa. Several mechanized brigades, an assault regiment, territorial defense units, and the Ukrainian National Guard were stationed there. The strikes were comprehensive in nature, creating an element of surprise. At the same time, units from another line were operating in the Kharkiv region. Their task was to strike at equipment and supply depots in the areas of Ambarn and Volchansk. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the enemy lost a tank, an armored combat vehicle, several vehicles, artillery pieces, and electronic warfare stations. Importantly, ammunition and material supply depots were hit, which significantly limits the capabilities of Ukrainian units in this area. Air defense systems provided support. They played a critical role in repelling attacks by Ukrainian drones and HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. Over the course of a day, more than 100 drones, 3 rockets, and 2 guided bombs were intercepted. These statistics demonstrate the tension in the airspace, where a battle of technologies is taking place literally every minute. In his latest speech, Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov emphasized that the Russian armed forces will continue to carry out the tasks of the special military operation by conducting offensive operations. He noted that 7% of the territory of the Luhansk People's Republic is already controlled by Russian troops, as well as about 79% of the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic. According to him, significant parts of the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions are under control. These statements provide the context for understanding that the strikes on port infrastructure were not an isolated action. They are part of a large-scale strategy to consolidate successes and advance further. The Russian command is seeking to show that the operation is progressing steadily and consistently. For the Ukrainian side, these events have been a painful wake-up call. Ports have always been considered a pillar of economic and military stability. Losing control of them means that logistics must be urgently reorganized. Kyiv understands that without a stable supply chain, it is difficult to maintain the combat readiness of its units. That is why Ukraine's official statements are emotional and alarming. The international reaction was also swift. Representatives of a number of Western countries expressed concern about the expansion of strikes deep into Ukrainian territory. The media reported that Russian troops were demonstrating their ability to carry out systematic strikes on targets that were previously considered relatively secure. Ukraine's allies interpreted this as a reminder that the situation on the front line remains extremely unstable. For viewers following the developments, it is important to understand that this is not just a local operation. It is part of a large chess game where every move is carefully calculated. The strikes on ports are shifting the balance of power. They are forcing the Ukrainian command to reallocate resources, seek new supply routes, and negotiate additional support measures with Western partners. All of this is creating tension and uncertainty. Military correspondence reports describe the atmosphere that prevails in the area of operations. It is a tension comparable to the rumble of an approaching thunderstorm. Each new strike, each piece of news from the briefing is perceived as part of a larger picture where the stakes are incredibly high. There is no room for random actions here. Everything is happening according to a carefully planned scenario that is unfolding right before the eyes of the world. After a series of strikes on port infrastructure, experts began to discuss how this would affect the further development of events. Analysts note that strikes on such facilities always have a delayed effect. The loss of equipment or warehouses is felt immediately, but the destruction of logistics routes manifests itself gradually. The longer the supply system is disrupted, the more difficult it is to restore it under constant pressure. The first scenario discussed by military observers is related to changes in the plans of the Ukrainian command. With the port infrastructure's capabilities limited, supplying armed units will become more difficult. This could lead to a reduction in the scale of offensive operations or a postponement of their timing. Ukraine will be forced to look for new supply routes across its western borders, which will increase delivery times and risks. The second scenario concerns the reaction of Ukraine's allies. Deliveries of weapons and military equipment from Europe and North America have largely relied on port routes. Now, partners will have to adapt to the new conditions. There may be an increase in transport flows through Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. However, such changes will take time and incur new costs. In addition, the strikes have shown that these routes may also become vulnerable in the future. The third scenario is related to the internal situation in Ukraine itself. The loss of part of the infrastructure is putting additional pressure on the economy. Ports played not only a military but also a civilian role, facilitating exports and imports. Their partial destruction is affecting budget revenues and the ability to offset military costs. Economic tensions may increase, which in the long term will affect the stability of the entire system. The international community has already responded with political statements. Representatives of the United States and a number of European Union countries have expressed concern and condemned the strikes on infrastructure, calling them an attempt to weaken Ukraine strategically. However, Russian officials claim that the strikes were carried out exclusively against facilities used for military purposes. This contrast in the interpretation of events is the subject of lively debate in the international arena. Security experts believe that such strikes could push the West to supply new weapons, including air defense systems and countermeasures against unmanned aerial vehicles. On the other hand, political fatigue with the conflict is growing in a number of European countries, and it is possible that some allies will lean toward cautious action. Thus, the response may be mixed. It is also important to consider the psychological effect. Strikes on targets in the rear cause anxiety among the population and push the leadership to take tough measures. For Russia, this is also a means of exerting pressure, demonstrating its ability to act not only on the front line, but also deep within the territory. In the information space, an image is being created of an operation capable of changing the course of events. Analysts point out another important factor. If the strikes on ports become systematic, in a few months the Ukrainian army may face serious supply problems. In that case, further offensive actions will be complicated. At the same time, Russia will have the opportunity to strengthen its positions and expand its control over new territories. International markets are also reacting to these events. Any attack on port infrastructure causes fluctuations in the prices of grain and other commodities. Since Ukraine remains an important player in the agricultural market, the strikes have an impact on the global economy. This in turn increases pressure on politicians in Europe and overseas, forcing them to look for ways to reduce risks. Thus, an attack on port infrastructure is not just a military episode. It is an event with multi-layered consequences that affects the plans of commanders, the policies of allies, the economy, and even global markets. Many observers say that it is precisely such actions that become key turning points. They change the logic of the campaign, force the parties to seek new solutions, and create the feeling that the front line now runs not only on the ground, but also throughout the entire supply system and international relations. In the coming weeks, much will depend on whether the strikes on infrastructure continue. If they become regular, we can expect a serious change in the situation on the battlefield and in the political dialogue surrounding the conflict. If, however, this was a one-off, the effect will be more symbolic. In any case, the events of recent days have already gone down in history as one of the most alarming signals of recent months. The events of the last few days have been an important milestone in the development of the conflict. The strike on Ukraine's port infrastructure demonstrated a new phase in the strategy, in which attention is focused not only on the front line, but also on vital rear facilities. This decision was not accidental. It was the result of months of observation, analysis, and preparation, which made it possible to deliver a comprehensive and precise strike. For Russia, this operation demonstrates its determination and ability to control the enemy's strategic nodes. For Ukraine, it is a challenge that requires an urgent review of logistics and the search for new solutions. For the international community, it is an alarming signal that the front is expanding and affecting an increasingly wide range of issues, including the economy and global security. The main feature of these strikes is their symbolic and practical significance at the same time. On the one hand, they weaken Ukraine's military potential, creating difficulties for supplying units. On the other hand, they change the perception of what is happening on the international stage. The strikes on ports demonstrate that at any moment the situation could go beyond the usual scenarios and take on new contours. Experts' conclusions vary, but most agree on one thing. We are witnessing a stage where pressure on infrastructure is becoming a key tool. Whereas previously battles for populated areas and fortified zones were considered decisive, now strikes on supply centers, warehouses, and transport routes are coming to the fore. This changes the very logic of military operations. The likely scenarios for how events will unfold remain alarming. If such strikes continue, Ukraine will face difficulties in organizing new offensive operations. Russia, in turn, will be able to consolidate its successes and continue its advance. The international community will be forced to respond by either increasing its support for Kyiv or, conversely, considering new political solutions. It is important for the average viewer to understand that these events do not only concern the military and politicians. Each such strike affects the economy, food prices, transport routes, and therefore the lives of millions of people. This is the depth of what is happening. Strikes on port infrastructure are not just a military episode, they are a chain reaction that affects the whole world. Today, we witnessed an operation that may become a turning point. It has already gone down in history as one of the most large-scale and complex operations in recent months. The world is closely following developments, and analysts are making predictions that are full of anxiety. There is a feeling in the air that the storm is just beginning. This is the second metaphor that best describes the atmosphere of what is happening. We will continue to monitor the situation and keep you informed. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes and the latest analysis. Your interest and support help us develop the project and tell the truth about the most important events.